if all of you if all of you remember that in 2012, Barack Obama not only won the Hispanic vote in Florida, he won the Cuban vote in Florida. And so I have a lot of interest in Florida. I'm a Democrat who hasn't given up in Florida. And in the year that I have been doing my work at Hopium, Donna Deegan was our first really big project. We raised lots of money for her and brought in national volunteers. And I actually had at that point a staff person who I handed over to the campaign who went to go work on the campaign in the final few weeks to coordinate volunteers around the country to make calls and to text and so on. But we also got significantly behind Tom Keene early in his effort to flip the seat in Orlando earlier this year. And I really felt that Donna's race was a sign that the Democratic Party was on a comeback trail, that Ron DeSantis had gone too far and overreached and gotten out of position in Florida. And then we had this other victory in with Tom Keene early in January of 2020 of this year. And then finally, now I'm very excited about the ballot initiative that's on the ballot to roll back DeSantis' 6-week abortion ban. I think this is something that could be transformative in the state of Florida. Having the Republicans have to defend the 6-week ban in this election, something that polls in the low 20s, it's going to be very difficult for them, despite DeSantis' bluster. And so my hope is that we're on the road back in Florida. And it's really one of the reasons I agreed to be here tonight is that, it's very foundational. The success of Donna Deegan is a very foundational moment in the development of my own community. And so, I feel kinship with all of you in that sense. So let me do what I'm here really to do primarily, which is to talk about national politics. And then we're happy to take your questions. And I'll go about 15 minutes at the most. And so we've got plenty of time for Q&A because lots of people have lots of questions. And finally, before I begin, thank you all. Thank you for what you're doing. It really matters. This is a deeply consequential election. We have reason for optimism as Democrats in Florida. And as you all know, Florida still is the largest and most important swing state in the country. And so everything we do here together really matters. Nationally, here's my view about where things are now. Joe Biden is a good president. The country's better off. We have a very strong case for re-election. The Democratic Party is strong, unified, raising tons of money and winning elections all across the country. And what do the Republicans have? I mean, they have Trump, who's the ugliest political thing that any of us have ever seen. And so in every way imaginable, 6.5 months out, I would much rather be us than them at the national level. Let me go through those and break those down a little bit for you. Number one, Joe Biden is a good president. The country's better off. I think this is indisputable. When he took office in January of 21, the vaccines had not been distributed. Trump had just grossly mismanaged COVID and caused hundreds of thousands of people to die unnecessarily. We had the economy had crashed. The global economy was teetering. It was a dire time. And Biden came into office in January 20th, 2021, without a peaceful transfer of power, the first time in American history, without a traditional transition that happens where there's a handover of the government from one president to the other, and a city that was under essentially military occupation, having suffered what was an armed attack on the Capitol on one of the only days that all 435 members are there on the same day. So we were in a time of extraordinary crisis. Joe Biden definitely has come into office in one of the most dire times of any president in American history. And look where we are today, right? The economy is booming. We have, record stock market. We have the strongest growth of any advanced economy in the world. Just today, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, announced that the growth here in the United States would be double than any other advanced economy this year. We have the best job market since the 1960s. Real wages, which is wages minus inflation, are galloping at one of the highest levels in recent decades. We have more new businesses being formed every year than any year in American history. We have what's the worker participation rate, which is how many workers are working as a percentage of the population among prime age workers, are setting records. There's so many. We have the lowest uninsured rate in American history. The deficit is trillions of dollars less than it was under Trump. I mean, I think in every way imaginable, right? We are far better off today. And we should be confident about that when we make our case. Yes, inflation's been too high, but inflation's been too high everywhere. Inflation has been a global phenomenon that was driven by COVID and by the war in Ukraine, by Russia's aggression in Ukraine, and by OPEC cutting production and raising gas prices here in the United States and all around the world. It's a global phenomenon. And actually, inflation here is lower than it is in any other advanced economy. So we're not only growing faster than any other advanced economy in the world, we have lower inflation than any other advanced economy in the world. So I will put up Joe Biden's track record as president up against anything that the Republicans want to throw at us. And I think it's really important to recognize that in the last few months, I think that most of the central attacks against Biden have evaporated. The economy is strong. It isn't weak. Inflation is down. It's not up, right? Crime has plummeted. Crime and murder rates have plummeted across the United States. Crime isn't raging. There's no war on energy. We actually had more domestic oil, gas, and renewables produced last year than any year in American history. We're more energy independent than we've been in decades. And we had more oil produced in America last year than any nation in any year in the history of the world, right? We're more energy independent than we've been in decades. On the border, which is an issue Republicans have made very central to their indictment of Biden, they had an advantage over us, but Trump, in his idiocy and his decline, decided to actually come out against a reasonable bipartisan measure to address the border. So we are now the party of order on the border, and they're the party that's for chaos. We just litigated this in the New York 3 special election, where the Republicans ran everything they could at Tom Suozzi, and we won that on the border and immigration. We won that election in New York by 8 points, a district that we had lost by 7.5 points just in 2022. So that we just tried this out. They're the party of chaos in the border. We're the party of order that wants to fix it. And it worked very well on the ground, live fire in a real election. And then on the two things that have been very central to their attack on Biden about himself as a leader. Number one, the Biden crime family story we now know was a Russian operation that was laundered into the United States by willing Republicans, once again, who've been selling Russian disinformation and propaganda into America. There was no truth to it. It's been completely debunked, right? And now we also know the question about his age, which is a legitimate question. We can talk about that. Was largely, I think, assuaged. Concerns about that were largely assuaged based on his very strong performance of the State of the Union. And we also learned that the special counsel lied about what happened with the interview and when he questioned Joe Biden about Hunter. We know from the transcript that the special counsel lied about what took place. And so a lot of those concerns that were raised a few months ago about Biden's age and his competency have also, I think, been largely addressed. And so the Republicans, I think, have really run out of attacks on Biden. And so the election's in the process, in my view, of turning from a referendum on Joe Biden to a referendum on Trump. And that's a big problem for Donald Trump and the Republicans. Number two, Joe Biden, the Democratic Party is strong, unified, raising lots of money and winning elections all across the country. We did really well in 2018 and 2020. We took away the House, the Senate, and the presidency from the Republicans. It was a great run that we had. But what we've done since the spring of 2022 may be more remarkable. The party in power always loses seats in special elections, off-year elections, midterm elections. And we've actually gained ground. We gained a Senate seat in 2022. We gained state legislative chambers. We gained governorships across the country. It was a tough year in Florida, but in most of the rest of the country, we did really, really well, far better than anybody expected. It's my view that since Dobbs happened in the spring of 2022, that something broke inside the Republican Party, that Republicans have really struggled in election after election since Dobbs. I think the non-MAGA part of the Republican Party, the traditional Republicans, have really struggled to follow MAGA's lead since the spring of 2022. I think for many Republicans, Dobbs was just, and the ending of Roe and the stripping of rights and freedoms away from more than half the population was just a bridge too far. It was too much, that this MAGA party had gone, it was becoming too dangerous and risky. And so what we've had sort of one basic set of elections and political dynamics since Dobbs happened in the spring of 2022. We've had Democrats continuing to overperform expectations and Republicans continuing to struggle. It's happened with special elections all across the country. It's happened in the midterm elections. It's happened with fundraising. It's happened in the structures of the two parties. Our party is unified. Their party is extraordinary, unprecedented, as I called it on TV the other night, dumpster fire, right? Where the RNC is in turmoil. They're very far behind building a general election. They're struggling to raise hard dollars. And so, if you think back to what happened in 2022, we actually outperformed our 2020 results in Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Minnesota, Michigan, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania. We got all the way up to 59% in Colorado, 57% in Pennsylvania, 55 in Michigan, 54 in New Hampshire. It was an amazing performance by the Democratic Party in what was supposed to be a bad year for us. That would have been an amazing performance in a good year for us. And we did that in a bad year. It was remarkable. And then that strong overperformance in Republican struggle showed up throughout 2023. We flipped a Wisconsin Supreme Court seat in April. We then 1 year, Donna Deegan got elected, in a race that Republicans were confident they were going to win in. We then won on that same day the mayoralty of Colorado Springs. So two of the largest Republican-held cities in the country flipped in early May 2023. We then took away the 6-week abortion ban in Ohio, and we can talk about that because it's relevant to what's about to happen in Florida. The entire Republican machine in Ohio, with the governor and everyone, fought to keep the 6-week ban. It was eliminated, and women had their rights and freedoms restored in Ohio. We won special elections all across the country that we weren't supposed to win. In some cases, we outperformed the partisan lean of those districts by 15 to 20 points. And then we flipped the Virginia Assembly in November. We gained seats in New Jersey. And when we flipped the Virginia Assembly, I think we took away this fantasy Republicans had that the 15-week abortion ban, which is what they ran on, was an escape valve for them. It was a safety valve for them to escape the political punishment post-Dobbs, and it didn't work. And we also, Glenn Youngkin, despite being very popular and raising tons of money for the Republicans, we were able to defeat this huge Republican machine that Glenn Youngkin had built in Northern Virginia. So 2023 was also a year of success and taking stuff away from them. And then the question is, would that basic dynamic show up in 2024? And to me, it has. I mean, Trump has underperformed his public polling in the early states. They're struggling to raise money. The party is in disarray. There's unprecedented Republican rebellion against Trump, from two former vice presidents, a former nominee of their party, former party chairman of their party, many former congressmen, many Trump senior staff and cabinet officials have all come out and said they're not supporting president, the former president. We've never seen anything like this before in modern American history, this kind of rebellion inside the party. You've seen, and then in New York 3, which was a special election in that George Santos seat, all the media told us in the run up to that seat is that this would be a bellwether. This was going to tell us a lot about the election. And the polling had us up by 2 or 3 points, and we won by 8 points. And if it was a bellwether, then it's catastrophic for the Republicans. And so I think we've had that same basic dynamic play out in early 2024, us overperforming. Biden had 2 challenges in the primary. Both of them flamed out, Robert Kennedy and Dean Phillips, right? And there's been no successful ability to mount a major campaign. There isn't significant opposition to Joe Biden in any way, and we can talk more about that, right? And there was an opportunity to challenge him the way there was for Trump. It didn't happen. And all of you know that the polling shows us that some large number of Haley voters are open to voting Democrat in 2024 for Biden. If we get, a big chunk of Haley voters, and if Liz Cheney's campaigning for us, it's going to be a big problem for the Republicans in 2024. And then finally, Trump, right? What I call the ugliest political thing we've ever seen. I think that he's having a very, very bad month. I think the flailing that he did after both the Arizona and Florida Supreme Court decisions, where he believed he was being smart, right? This is the funny thing about Trump, right? I could say the idiocy is strong with MAGA, is that that Trump believed he was being smart, right? I'm just a moderate. I'm going to leave it up to the states. But what he did was he then endorsed the most extreme abortion bans in the entire country. He endorsed Idaho, which has no exceptions at all, 6 weeks, and also has a trafficking statute where if you bring a minor out of the state, you can be prosecuted. Doctors get jailed in Idaho for committing abortion. So Donald Trump, in his idiocy and his diminishment, his extremism, actually came out and made it clear that he was the most dangerous abortion extremist in America. And he thought he was doing something other than that. It was unbelievably comical to watch all of this. And then he backtracks in Arizona, and he doesn't like Arizona. Why? I mean, Arizona is actually not as restrictive as other states. And so if he doesn't like Arizona, does that mean he's going to fight in Florida and come out against the 6-week ban in Florida? Is he going to come out against the Idaho ban or the ban in Alabama? He dug a ridiculous place for himself, because I think he is not what he was. I think he is diminished. He's aged, and he's not, I don't think he's totally there anymore. And he's making incredible mistakes that are the kind of mistakes that candidates who lose elections make. He just this last week claimed that he was never said he was for rolling back the ACA and stripping health insurance from tens of millions of Americans. That's not true. We have the video and we have all the tweets, right? And he claims that he actually likes the ACA. I mean, it's just idiotic, right? The thing he did on the border was idiotic. And I think we have to recognize that he's continuing to make traditional mistakes that candidates who lose make and lose elections make again and again and again. And then we know about, there are, in my view, 6 things that voters are about to find out about Donald Trump that they didn't know before, that they didn't know in 2020. And he lost the election in 2020. And I think these 6 things, and let me go through with them, because these are things we need to be talking about in our communities. Number 1, that he raped E. Jean Carroll in a department store dressing room in New York. And that's adjudicated by a jury of his peers. Number 2 is that he oversaw one of the largest financial frauds in American history and has been, potentially fined, close to $500 million for his misdeeds. Number 3, that he stole America's secrets. He lied to the FBI about it. He shared those secrets with other people in what was one of the greatest national security breaches in the history of the United States. Number 4 is that he led an insurrection against America. He tried to overturn a legitimate election. He tried to end American democracy for all time. And now he's promised to finish the job if he gets into the White House in January of 2025. 5th, he and his family have corruptly taken more money from foreign governments than any family in American history, political family in American history. And 6th, he singularly is responsible for ending Roe and has now staked out some of the most extreme abortion positions that any politician have ever staked out in the history of the country. These 6 things, overcoming any one of these 6 things would be very difficult. He has to overcome all 6. I don't think he can. He doesn't have the political skill and acumen to do so. He is a diminished figure. His party and his campaign are an unbelievable historic mess. And he's got incredible, unprecedented opposition to him inside of his own party. If we work really hard and we put our heads down and we do what we need to do all across the country, we should be able to win this election. I also am keeping a very much an open mind to what can happen in Florida. Finally, what's happened in the polls in the last few weeks. It was the view it was my view and the view of the Biden campaign and many other political analysts that what was likely to happen is that once the campaign got turned on and the general election began and voters knew it was really Trump and really Biden, that a big chunk of our wandering coalition would start to come home. And that's what you've seen. Biden's numbers in the polling have gone up by 2 to 3 points in the last few months. The election is changing. Donald Trump is no longer ahead in this election. It is not consistent with the data that's in front of us to say that Donald Trump is leading in this election any longer. He may have been 2 months ago. He's not anymore. Harry Enton from CNN said it, the political analyst at CNN. Nate Cohn in the New York Times said it. Tegan Goddard, who's one of the newsletters, is one of the most respected political newsletters in Washington, said it's no longer appropriate to describe Trump as the front runner in this race. We're not where we want to be, and we got a lot of work to do. And there's the election's going to change in the months ahead. But as I end my presentation here today, I just want to remind everybody that Joe Biden is a good president. The country's better off. The Democratic Party is strong in winning elections all across the country. And they have Trump, who we all know is the ugliest political thing that any of us have ever seen. And it's why, in every way imaginable, 6.5 months out, I'd much rather be us than them. Thanks, everybody, so much for the opportunity to be with you. Let's get to questions, Hannah, and fire away however you want to do it.
Right. So let me put you on the view with the gallery. And if you have a question, I guess, a little flap of your hand or the thumbs up signal.
Or they can put them in the chat too.
Or you can pop them in the chat and I can,
if they're in the chat, Hannah, I'll go ahead and recognize you and read the question.
Oh, that sounds perfect.
Otherwise you grab the hands raised. We have a few.
Yep. All right, Nancy's first. That was fast, Nancy. You're
I know,
late.
because if you wait, you never get your
It's
question.
true. And then Mike's hand is up too. Okay.
So you're preaching to the choir, Simon. We love you like we love our children. But here, seriously, but here's my issue. When I look at the fact that a Republican has not won the total vote, the popular vote since 2004.
Yep.
And we see participation by Black voters and young voters down between 2018 and 2022. And we see the issue of Gaza looming. I
Yep.
have 3 20-somethings. It concerns me that this race comes down to an outsized influence by 6 or 7 states. And
Yep.
you know, what would you say to that? And thank you so much for your support of Donna Deegan. And I'd like to introduce you to Rachel Grage, who's amazing. Okay. So thank you so much.
Listen, we're not where we want to be. There's still work to be done. And you know that I will say though that I think that some of the data and the arguments about the erosion for Black and Hispanic younger voters for us is a little bit exaggerated. Let's see what happens in this election. You know, I want to remind everybody, and your experience in Florida is very different from the Mexican American parts of the country, right? But you know, we've won more elections and we have more power in the southwestern part of the United States today than we've had since the 1940s. And the reason that is because even though we may be getting a little bit less of the Hispanic vote, the population's growing so much that we're actually getting more net votes. And so let me give you an example. In 2004, Bush, we won in what was the best year for Republicans with Hispanic voters in recent times. We won 700,000 more Hispanic votes than Republicans did in 2004. In 2020, it was 5 million more Hispanic votes than the Republicans. The Republicans are the ones who are eroding with Hispanics. It's not us. This is red wavy, right? This whole narrative, because we can lose a little bit, and you know, a smaller piece of a bigger pie is still more pie, right? The way to think about it, and just from a math standpoint. So you know, we're in the process. In 2004, George Bush won Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, and New Mexico. In 2020, Joe Biden won those 4 states. The last time we had won those 4 states was in 1940. And you know, in 2004, Republicans controlled 5 of the 8 Senate seats in those 4 states. Now there are no Republicans in those 4 states in the Senate. Republicans in 2004 controlled 14 of the 21 House seats. We control 14 of the 23 House seats there now. So our success in the Southwest, even though we've fallen down a little bit in Florida with Hispanic voters, with Cubans in particular, right? We've actually done unbelievably well with Mexican American voters in the Southwest and the western part of the U.S. That's why California is not a competitive state anymore. And New Mexico, which was a battleground state, is not competitive. Colorado is not competitive anymore. Arizona is actually moving with greater rapidity towards the Democrats than any of us could have imagined, frankly. And it's in part because John McCain, you know, led the opposition to Trump, and that Arizona was not an extremist state. And so, you know, I feel like we've got work to do. I will just say is that there is an enormous amount of data that we have that suggests that the Israel-Gaza issue is not a voting issue for an overwhelming number of Democrats. It is an issue where there is a small group of people in our party where this is very important to them. And we have a difference of opinion, right? I mean, we're not aligned on this. We don't have to agree on everything as Democrats, right? We can have debates without, you know, we can have, as Obama used to call it, we can disagree without being disagreeable, right? This doesn't need to become something that splinters us. But I will just tell all of you, from somebody who studies national data all day long, there is no data showing that there is significant opposition to Joe Biden in the Democratic Party over this. There just isn't. You know, I will give you one example. The Economist YouGov poll, which comes out every Wednesday, asked 18 to 29-year-olds, or asked everybody, but it broke it down by demographic, you know, what's the most important issue to you, and gave them a long choice. Let me just pull up my notes here. I wrote this down the other day. And among 18 to 29-year-old, the number of people who picked foreign policy was 2%. The number of people who picked national security issues as their number one issue was 3%. The number of people who picked abortion, climate change, gun safety, jobs, inflation, healthcare was much higher than when you added up national security and foreign policy combined. So we can't let some of the aggressive tactics that we've seen play out in the family on this persuade us that something is happening that isn't happening. I mean, there is a healthy debate happening here, and I can defend the president and what he's done. And I don't think that, I think that some of the criticisms of him inside the family have been really unfair, frankly. And I think he's tried really hard in what is a very difficult situation. But you know, one of the things we're doing at Hopium this week is that we're focusing on Ukraine. The speaker last night put forward a plan that gives us an outside chance of passing the Ukraine funding that we've been trying to get passed for 6 months. This is the most important foreign policy issue in America today, in my view, without any other thing being remotely close to it, including what's happening in the Middle East. If Putin wins in Ukraine, it is going to utterly change the world that we live in ways that I think are very difficult for people to understand. We have to go fight there. And, you know, the Republicans and Trump have held it up. And I'm asking everybody as a good Democrat to call your legislators in Washington, your Congress people, and let them know that you expect them to vote and fight for Ukraine funding on Friday. It doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat. They need to hear from all of you. This is the big one, in my view. This really matters. And we need to get this passed. If this doesn't pass, our standing in the world is going to take such an extraordinary hit. Our relationship with Europe is going to take an extraordinary hit. We will be a far weaker country. And our inability to pass the Ukraine funding is what's creating ambition. You know, it was Trump's original appeasement of Putin, and now the inability for us to pass the Ukraine funding is emboldening our adversaries all around the world and making it more likely, making us far less safe. We've got to show America's strength here. And so please join me, if you can, in making a call tomorrow to your congressional representatives to let them know that you expect them to vote for and fight for funding on Ukraine on Friday.
Okay, so I'm just gonna say, we've got not a lot of time. I'm gonna have Rachel, Mike, and then there's 2 questions in the chat. And if we get to Suzanne, we're good.
Do you
So
want to
Rachel,
take a
you're
bunch of the
next.
questions and then I answer them as a bunch because they may have some overlap? Do you
Okay,
want to
so
do that,
Rachel-
Susan?
Sure. Let me actually read some of the chat questions. So Colette asked, "What is your view on the threat posed by third-party candidates, and particularly the Kennedy candidacy?
Yep.
And do you think the Biden campaign is taking this threat seriously?" And then Eileen asked, "What are the implications of the Supreme Court potentially overriding the January 6th convictions?"
Yeah. Let me do the RFK thing because that's on everybody's mind. And then thank you for putting that up. Look, I think we have to remember, as I said earlier, the most important splinter party, rogue party, third party movement in America today is in my view, the Never Trumpers, and they're aligned with us. I mean, the group that could have the most significant impact on this election could. You know, imagine if Mitt Romney and George Bush and Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney campaign with Biden in the final few weeks of the election. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it could. Or at least they could be campaigning against Trump and maybe not endorsing Biden, right? The permission structure that's going to give to Republicans to not vote Republican is going to be extraordinary. And so what everyone needs to realize when you think about third party, the most important manifestation of that is aligned with us in this kind of temporary pro-democracy coalition that I think could be very, you know, as I say, the issues that are going around Israel, Gaza for Biden is a challenge for him. It's not a threat. What's happening with the Republican rebellion against Trump is an existential threat to his candidacy. He can't win. And the fact that when you make the list of all the idiotic things he's done, which is growing every day, perhaps the most idiotic thing that he did was telling Nikki Haley to F off and that he wasn't interested in her voters coming in to be part of his party. How in the world can he win the election without Nikki Haley voters? He can't, right? So you want to talk about like the dumbest thing that we've ever seen? That was way up there, right? And so So on RFK, look, of course, everyone's taking it seriously. We all went through 2000 and 2016. We had those experiences. And I think don't be scared by Robert Kennedy, right? He's a terrible candidate. He's got extreme views. In terms of our business, our ability to inform voters about how unacceptable he is and how extreme he is, we have a lot of tools to do that. And the campaign and the DNC, there's even a whole super PAC that's been set up to just inform voters about Kennedy. We're a little behind. I mean, he's worked really hard to using TikTok and other means to get in front of young people, but we've got time. And I think it's also, he's like Trump, right? Like, he's a ridiculous candidate. Let's just be honest, right? Like, he's ridiculous. And we cannot be scared by him. I mean, he holds ridiculous views and he's way out of the mainstream. And so I think that, could they have produced a third party candidate that could have been really threatening to us and much more dangerous than Kennedy? Yeah, they could have, but they didn't. And I'm not intimidated or scared by him. And my view is neither should you. And remember, Hannah, we have this slogan at Hopium, which is that we need to do more and worry less. We in general as Democrats need to worry less and just do more. Worrying makes you scared. Worrying puts you in a defensive crouch. Worrying takes you away from the world, right? Don't do that. Take your anxiety that we all have about the election and Trump and channel it into good works. That's why you're here tonight, right? With this, the beaches, the party, the Democratic Party of the Beaches, I guess, if I'm saying it properly. By the way, what an amazing name. And that's one of the best party operations in the country, name-wise, right? Who wouldn't want to be part of that? And so don't be spooked by Kennedy, but get informed. Make sure you've got your 2 or 3 points that are important to you, that when you're talking to people, that you can inform them about what it is about him that is worries, that is unacceptable to you. There are so many that you're going to have to narrow it down and choose.
Josh and I were just chatting. We think we'd like to have Rachel's question wrapped up with the Florida questions from the chat. So we've got a couple. So Rachel's going to ask her question, and I'm going to just say we've got issues around, can the National Party better assist local Florida candidates? We've got uncontested GOP seats in our Florida realm.
Yeah.
Can our Debbie Powell defeat Rick Scott? And that's to help us get to 55. And Rachel's our candidate running in our district, which is, we've got a good chance, but it's still a very Republican district. So Rachel, why don't you ask your question, and then we can wrap that into all those points, I hope.
Right. Thanks, Hannah. And thank you so much for being here tonight, Simon. It's a real thrill to have you. Like Hannah mentioned, I need a good portion of NPAs and moderate Republicans to win my state house seat. And I just wondered, in your opinion, what's the best way to appeal to these groups?
Yeah, listen, I'm having been a campaign guy. I mean, I'm very deferential to local campaigns and local understandings. I don't think I should be telling you from here in Washington how to win your race, but I will make a couple observations. In the states that have, sort of gone from being slightly Republican to being more competitive, and Arizona and Georgia are probably the 2 most recent examples that are front of mind. And then, I'm hoping that North Carolina becomes another state like that this cycle. The work came from within the state. I mean, no one's coming to save you, gang. There is no national party. There is no national organization that's going to come in. This was work that was done by people in the states who raised the money, recruited the candidates, did the hard work of voter reg and all the other blocking and tackling candidate recruitment and all the other things you talk about. If you expect the national party is going to come in and do this for you, you're going to be out of power for a generation. And it's why you're all here tonight, right? You have to do the work. There just isn't enough money to go around. And frankly, it's better. You guys know better, frankly, how to win Florida than people in Washington do. And so I think it's important. I do think that, there is a splintering in the Republican Party. Tom Keene, it would be good for you to spend time with Tom Keene. That was the most recent win we had, and get his, understandings. I mean, he went really, really hard on the insurance crisis, right, in the state, the property insurance crisis in the state. That was important. Abortion was also an important part of his message. And I do think that, one of the things that is going to be interesting for you as you gear up is do you get a sense from voters that the Republicans have gone too far? They've that they've gone a little, that people are still Republicans, but they've gone a little crazy. DeSantis has already come back from his book banning. Like, he's starting to pull back. The assembly, the Florida legislature this year in this
Definitely.
legislative session didn't really have an aggressive agenda, because in essence they're playing defense, right? They
Yeah,
were still
exactly.
dealing with the mistakes they made by going too far a year ago.
Yep.
And I think this issue of the 6-week abortion ban gives you an opportunity, particularly with Republican women and independent women, to speak to them, and they may be more open to you than they would have been otherwise, right? And that's what we're
Definitely.
seeing in other states, and it's certainly, I think, the view of the Biden campaign that's creating an opening for us. It's encouraging. The Biden campaign has put staff on the ground in Florida. I don't. It's not one of the 7 battleground states right now. It's the 8th state. It's in this in-between place. They're staying optimistic that it's something that could become
Okay.
in play, but it's going to be daunting. I think we've got, you guys are realistically, it's 4, 6, 8 years of hard work to
Mhm.
get back to a place where Florida is competitive again. I've gotten to know Fentress Driscoll. She's incredibly impressive, leader for you in the House. I know Debbie Merkerslow Powell a little bit. I'm not that close to her. She's also, I think, running a spirited campaign. But we've got work to do here, and there are no shortcuts in this business. We just have to grind it out and keep getting better every 2 years, to the point where you're back in a competitive position again in Florida. I think it's there. I think it can be done. I
Mhm.
think the Republicans have given us this historic opportunity this cycle,
Exactly.
with the ballot initiative and with their going too far in abortion, and positioning himself on an issue. Look, there has not been in the modern era of politics, in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, an issue that a national political party ran on that mattered to voters, that was polling in the 20s. There just hasn't been an issue like that, because usually issues are at 42, 45, 51, right? The 6-week abortion ban, and despite DeSantis's bluster, is among the most unpopular things the Republicans could possibly be running on in 2024. So I think you have to be. It's a tough issue. It's not a slam dunk. You got to listen to your constituents,
Mhm.
and you got to go talk to people door to door. I think the canvassing work and the door to door work, really matters. Tom Keene certainly did an extraordinary amount of canvassing himself, in that race that he won, in addition to having a team that did a ton of canvassing. Democrats are fired up. They're ready to go to work.
Yep.
And part of what all of you need to do is to make sure that you're building the most powerful team you can,
Yep.
for the fall. That's one of the reasons I'm here tonight. It's one of the reasons Hannah and Michael and everybody, and Josh here and Deborah, that all of you are doing this work. People are open to the Democratic Party today in a way they weren't in 2 years ago,
Right.
in some cases, and in red-leaning places. And so you got to use that advantage now and
Yep.
prosecute as best you can.
Thank you.
Great.
Muted.
Hannah, you are muted.
I just muted myself. Suzanne has an interesting question about Trump's legal issues. Do you want to ask the question, Suzanne, or you want me to
And
read it?
this will be the last question.
All right, so this is a good one. This just happened today, right? He's like on trial for a real big deal. So
Yeah, it's a serious problem for him. As I went through it earlier, I have 2 views about this. One is that all those things that I mentioned earlier, those 6 things, don't require a conviction in court for us to be talking about now, because they're all facts. They're things that happened, right? And so we shouldn't have waited for Mueller and a few years ago to sort of have the conversation about Russia's penetration of the Republican Party. And we shouldn't wait for any of these prosecutors, because we don't need convictions to make the case that he stole secrets, or that he led an insurrection, or that he ended Roe, or all the things that I went through earlier. Having said that, I do think that for the strongman Donald Trump, who, I've been joking that it is amazing. It continues to be amazing to me that the strongman leader of the American right, wears more makeup every day than a drag queen, right? And that, that we need to view him in the way that we think of the emperor has no clothes, or the wizard, pulling the curtain back from the wizard. He's sort of bamboozled everybody into believing that he was a strong man rather than a weak man. He's a painted man, right? He's not a strong man. He's he is something, he's a fraud, right? And I feel like part of what's happening in the national media is that there are more and more people saying, hey, the emperor doesn't have any clothes, or the curtain's being pulled further and further back on the wizard, and there's just an old man back there. Trump has looked, in my view, just physically terrible in the last few days. Lawrence O'Donnell did a whole incredible monologue on this last week. The color of orange that he's been recently is doesn't exist in nature, right? It's been so unnatural and weird. And he's going to be walking into that courtroom as this, that is a color that is not a human color, right? And like with his crazy hair that is obviously fake, and his bluster and all this. And I just think everyone's like sees through all, is beginning to see through all this and realize how fundamentally ridiculous he is. And I think what is hurting him now is, I think the abortion stuff that's happened, as I went through earlier, was very definitional for him, right? He came out now, he's an abortion extremist, a dangerous one. That was perhaps not understood a few weeks ago. It will become understood. The other thing is he's sitting there, falling asleep, his jaw is slack. He can't, he's complaining that he can't go be at his son's graduation when we know there's actually no trial scheduled that day. It's just the most pathetic thing ever. He's claiming he can't take off for Passover when the judge has already released them for 4 days during Passover, right? Not just 2 days, but 4 days for Passover, right? And so all of this whining and complaining, in what universe does that make him look strong? In what universe does him being on trial for activities related to him paying a porn star that he had sex with while his wife was home with their young baby, how in any of this does this accrue to him in a positive way? It doesn't. Don't buy into the bullshit. Don't buy into the strongman spell that he weaves, right? This guy is the ugliest political thing we've ever seen. Shame, eternal shame on the Republican Party for rallying behind this guy. He's the most significant threat to our democracy in our history. And he's ridiculous. I mean, my line that I use on this is that, you can dye his hair and paint his face and strap a girdle on him in a diaper too, and this guy's still never going to look like a presidential candidate, and pump him full of speed, which I guess they forgot to do in court the last couple of days. And he's never going to look like a presidential candidate again. I'll conclude with this, right? All the things that we have to do, because we're not where we want to be. We have a lot of work to do. I'm not being Pollyannish here. All the work we have to do is the kind of work that normally gets done in a campaign. What they have to do, which is to dress this guy up and make him look like a serious presidential candidate again, I think is outside the ability of a campaign to do. And so I think we have to develop tools for mocking him. And all of who live in Florida, right, because he's now a Florida resident, that he's got this army of guys driving around in their trucks with the MAGA flags, right, in Florida. And it's designed to intimidate it and scare it, right? But you can't give into that. We got to stay in the place of truth. And we have an obligation to stay in a place of truth for our fellow citizens, and not allow all this strongman bluster and all this bullshit to dictate our understanding what's happening in our own country, right? Joe Biden is a good president. The country's better off. The Democratic Party is strong. And they have Trump, the ugliest thing that we've all ever seen. That's where the election is. It's why I'm so fundamentally optimistic. Keep working hard, gang. I'm really proud to be there. I will tell you, electing Donna was really important to me, because we didn't know that she was going to win. All of you know that no one really thought she was going to win. But because all of you did the hard work, you elected a great mayor, a great woman. She's a great leader. And you gave Florida Democrats hope all across the state that we could make things better there. And so you did a big thing. And I'm here really at the end of the day just to say thanks to all of you, and thank you for what you do. And let's stay in touch, keep fighting hard, and get some rest this summer, but we got a big election to go win together in the fall.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
Simon.
Take
Simon
care.
Rosenberg, everybody.